Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Coaching Call podcast. On this podcast, we'll cover various types of coaching by trainers in sports, martial arts, fitness, and business. We'll discuss each coach's methods to getting the most out of their respective athletes or clients and how they attempt to change the platform in which they coach. Join us on a fun adventure as we discuss unique coaching styles. Coaching is a universal part of how we get others to get something done. Join your host, Raphael, and his guests on this unique journey in coaching.
Hi, I'm Sifu Raphael, and this is the Coaching Call podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. This episode was made possible by listeners like you. Good morning, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining me on Coaching Call. How are you today?
Very well. Good morning, Sifu Raphael. Doing well. Great to see you, and thank you again for sharing the microphone with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I'm super excited because what we're going to do today is we're going to do a deep dive into who Matthew is. Ooh, yeah. How you're impacting the world, literally. You're all over the place. You're everywhere. Where are you now? You're in Mexico, right?
I'm in Mexico City. Yes.
Mexico City. Very cool. And recently you were in Guatemala?
I was on my trip to Guatemala for about a 10-day, 11-day trip.
Nice.
Very fascinating to get to know Guatemala. I have a brother-in-law in Guatemala. I've never been there. And so to do some conferences, meet a lot of people that influence the country in a big way. So it's wonderful. As you know, I have a special place in my heart for Latin America.
Yes, I know.
The culture, the people, the language. So yeah.
We're going to get to all that good stuff. So what I want to do now is I want to get to know you. I know who you are as a person today, but I want to get to know who you are. How did you become who? So let's go deep dive into where did you grow up? Who influenced you when you were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old?
All right, there we go.
You said music is on. Yeah, we have some dance music, I think, right? We had some dance. It's off now?
There you go. It's off. I didn't know if we were going to have that the whole conversation, but yes.
I thought it was a party. I'm just kidding.
It was good. It kept me upbeat, keeping the conversation upbeat. So I am from small town New England, central Massachusetts, a small town called Harvard, named after the same man the university is named after. And the 10th of 13 children. So small town New England. 10. Yeah, I'm number 10 of 13.
I'm number 10 of 12. There
we go. That must be what makes us so special friends and that special connection.
Yes, absolutely.
So and I think that maybe without thinking about it, but it defines us, how we grow up, and growing up in that environment. Being from a big family yourself, you would understand that. I think the ability to build human relationships is fostered in big families, sharing, also generosity, having a generous heart. My parents were very generous people. Obviously, their generosity with life. Their generosity with always having other people under their roof, whether it be family members or relatives or friends that were going through difficult times in their own lives. And there was always room for more in our house. So our parents taught us that from the very beginning. And I think growing up in a very faith-based family, we were also taught to think about the transcendent, think about beyond time into eternity, think about who we wanted to be in this world, but also in eternity, the impact that we wanted to make in this world and in the next. So they really educated us very much in generosity and in the big picture of life, and not only the finite, but also the infinite. So I think that had a big influence. And we grew up very close to a monastic setting, very in the fields, in the countryside, and also around nuns and monks, which is always impactful because, these people that are dedicating their life to something transcendent, it also makes a difference. And it always challenges you as you see that, and it makes you think about the bigger picture. So that's where I'm from and where I grew up and the things that influenced me.
who stands out for you if you had to go back and think one person who stood out for you, who made an impact in your childhood?
Mm.
Mm,
I would say I wouldn't choose one. I spent a lot of time at the monastery with the monks,
mhm,
and I think that made a big difference. And there were a lot of I spent a lot of time there. It was a lot of fun. It was sort of we my mother would send us there so that we could work. She would volunteer us to go work with the monks. Um, she knew why that was important. Just the importance of learning to work and not just staying at home goofing around, and
mm,
also to be exposed to their lifestyle. And so I think just we would play sports with them, we would work with them, we would share meals with them. So that was a huge part of my growing up, spending time with them.
mm.
And I think that influenced me.
So, what kind of work did you do at a young age?
And with them, it was always cleaning. They have large operations, and so it was cleaning. It was cutting the grass, a lot of lawn work, and they would build their own buildings and facilities, and so it was also helping them build those.
Mm,
And then I worked from a very young age. It must have been from the age of 7 or 8. Worked in strawberry fields. Again, my mother would bring us all over there, and we would weed, and then we would prune the strawberry plants, and then during the strawberry season, we would pick the strawberries. So yes, and then I would cut grass, just as my aunt, whether it be at our home or at the neighbors and all that. We did that. I did it from a very young age. I can remember myself. The lawnmower was a lot bigger than me, and I was just this little kid behind it, pushing it. So yes,
I can see you coming home with, like, at the end of the day with strawberry all over your face.
that's right. That's right. They were delicious, but I think we ate so many we got kind of sick of strawberries at that point.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, you worked with the monks, you ate with them, you shared. What lessons would you say, besides the working, was some of the lessons that you still carry with you today from those early days?
From the early days, whether it be from the monks or from the family, I think work ethic was very important. Um, we were very duty obligation driven
Mm,
household, and there's a downside to that,
right.
which we can also get into, but very much that, very much about principles, about responsibility. So that's sort of, I think those were some of the lessons.
Mm,
There were being close to monastic life and all that. You also see the very human side and
mhm.
sometimes the dysfunctional side of communities.
Oh, yeah.
So I was exposed to that as well.
So, let's talk about your teenage years, right? We talked about when you were young. Were you still in that area where
Mhm.
you were still going in with the monks? Were you still working in the fields when you were a teenager, say 15, 16, 17?
Definitely. I did go to a boarding school, a seminary boarding school for a year in my 11th grade.
Mm,
So at that age, my brother was in the seminary, in another
all right.
seminary. So I have one brother that was with these monks, right? And then I have another brother that had joined another religious order called the Legionaries of Christ. And so that's a much larger international organization. So I was also exposed to them over the years and had a lot of great relationships there. Eventually, that's the order that I would join when I went to seminary. So I did 1 year, 11th, 12th, 11th grade was at the high school seminary in Connecticut, which was another fascinating experience. Met a lot of great friends that I still have today, till today.
Mm,
And,
wow.
and a lot of great education and formation, and as you would expect in that sort of environment. A lot of spiritual formation. We were doing sports all the time. Great academic formation. Um, so that's and I was into sports a lot. So I played soccer from a very young age. So I was always passionate about playing soccer, and that was always part of my life growing up.
Mm,
I graduated from high school, so I went to the high school seminary for a year. Then I went back home. to finish my senior year, and I did that because I didn't want to be a priest.
You didn't want to be.
I didn't want. So it's funny how things and well, we'll talk about that. But I went back home, finished my last year in high school, and then I did a volunteer year again with an organization linked to the Legionaries of Christ, which was about because I didn't know what to do with my life really. If I were to look back and just be honest, I didn't know what to go to school for, and I didn't just want to go to school because I had to,
Right.
and I wanted time to kind of think about what I was going to do. So I did this volunteer experience. It was during that time that then I decided to go to the seminary.
So seminary, what that means is that you were training to become a priest, right?
That's right. Yeah, seminary. It comes from a Latin word, but it's really about how a place where the seed can grow. And that's where the word seminary comes from. There's many types. And in the Catholic Church, there's religious orders, and then there's diocesan seminary. Right. And without getting all into that. So I joined the religious order, which is a global organization in a lot of different countries, and so it has a different hierarchy than the normal Catholic Church would have. They obviously they depend on each other, but it's just a different type of hierarchy, and it's a different lifestyle because we make vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. We live in community, so those are all really essential elements of what we would call consecrated or religious life. Living in community and making certain specific vows, what they would call the evangelical counsels, poverty, chastity, and obedience. And our life, and so we start with 2 years of novitiate, which is like 2 years of boot camp.
Religious boot camp.
Religious boot camp. So you think of boot camp, in the military, it's between 2 to 3 months, right? It's maybe 14, 15 weeks, maybe for the longest boot camp that there is. And so this is 2 years and intense, 2 years of intensity. But it's a disconnection from the world. And it's because it's about, in spiritual terms, sort of this dying to the world and being born into this new life. But it's also just it's detaching from the world and growing in the art of silence, the art of meditation, the art of connection with oneself and with the transcendent, and learning all of that. And so there's a lot of physical discipline. There's a lot. Our time was very measured. It's learning a lot of things about ourselves and what we live in community. So there was also a lot of sports, but most of our day was lived in silence, and there was a lot of work, a lot of study, a lot of prayer. That's what novitiate is all about. So for 2 years, and that's probably something that maybe I should talk more about. I'm not here, but because I think people find that fascinating.
It is fascinating.
And I know there's a book out there about that's gotten a lot of traction about living like a monk. And I think people they're attracted to that now. There's a huge shift towards spirituality and towards aspects of that lifestyle around the spiritual and mental disciplines.
People say that, right? They want to live like a monk, but they can't.
No, because we're not monks. But I think it's learning the certain things that they can teach us. But you're right. We can never. I don't think we should sort of deceive ourselves into thinking that we can live like that in our other lifestyle, because they're two very different lifestyles with very different focuses and missions. But I think, we can always learn a little bit.
We can.
So that's what novitiate was. It was really a breaking with the world and with everything, and so really in immersing yourself into this new lifestyle and into the spiritual. That was novitiate. Then we had a year of classical humanities, which is, again, much more focused on the academic, with all of the spiritual aspects, and still a very routine and discipline-oriented life, but very focused on very intense days of academia. The Latin, Greek, and studying the Latin and Greek authors and literature and art and all those sort of humanistic studies. Because it's all about the formation of the mind, and it's about also the formation of the ability to think and critical thinking, which is an important foundation, in my view, for any education.
A lot of people don't know what you just told us. Right? I grew up Roman Catholic. My brother-in-law was in the seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, he met my sister and he left it to
Right.
marry her, which I want to come back to that.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know what someone goes through, and you called it boot camp, right?
Right.
Religious boot camp. And when you think about regular boot camp for military, a lot of people find religion in that because they're praying that hopefully tomorrow won't be as bad as it was today. But
Right.
when we think about, right,
It's
because
funny
that's
because you
that's what
say that,
people are
but
doing.
I worked a lot with Marines, so it's funny. But they would say that in boot camp, everyone would go to church on Sunday, right? Because when you're
Interesting.
in those extremes, even if they weren't a faith, well, they would go for two reasons. It was because they needed to find some sort of inspiration and
Hmm.
encouragement in their sort of their hellish lifestyle of boot camp, but it was also their only time that they could get away from their directors and from their sergeants and trainers and educators.
Mm. Yeah, I got you. Matthew, do me a favor when you get a chance, just put your how people can find you in the private chat, and then I'll put it across the screen as well.
Of
So
course.
we wanna go deeper into why. I understand that your family was in it, and one of your brothers went into it, another brother went into it. What was the attraction to going into the seminary? Because you could have gone anywhere, right? And you even said, I didn't want to be a priest. But
Right.
guess what? You did. You
Yes,
became a priest.
I did. But when I go back over my story, there's sort of I think part of it was, I think that not knowing what I wanted to do was part of it, and
Mm,
then so there's a few things. I think I wanted to get out of small town New England. The second one is I wanted to do something meaningful and impactful, and so this organization was very attractive to me because of their youth, their vibrancy, their enthusiasm, the way they live. It's the virtue of charity and love, and it was a big organization, so it was sort of I became a global citizen through that, and so that was the things that sort of attracted me, and it was very, I would say, lastly, it was very duty and obligation driven. And I was sort of educated, at least in my view, that I saw that if I wanted to do something good and holy, then I had to be a path of great difficulty and
mm,
sacrifice and heroism. We were sort of educated around the importance of heroism. And so when I saw all my options, I thought, well, this looks very difficult, full of sacrifice, and it requires heroism. And so that must be the path. And so as I look back on it, I was very duty obligation driven. And I always say there wasn't because I wanted to, but it felt like I had to. So that's why I went to seminary. And it was also a way I think I had some identity difficulties, kind of being in, and this is maybe the downside of growing up in a large family, is I didn't really know maybe who I was, and I had to latch on to an external identity that would, in my view, would be acceptable
mm.
to a family and to others. And so this was one of those.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Easy to say now as I look back. Um, so, some of the underlying motives that we aren't always aware of.
Hmm. Hmm. One of the fascinating things that you said to me is the studying that you did. Because a lot of people don't always think of it as this is my old impression of a priest.
Uh-huh.
They went to the seminary to learn how to give a sermon. That was it.
Right.
That was it. That
Well,
was my impression. So you can see how blinded I was. And even though I went to church every Sunday, I went to the seminary, but I didn't see because my brother-in-law taught at the seminary
right.
and my sister taught because she's a professor. So she
Mhm.
taught Spanish to priests or people who were becoming priests who didn't know the language.
Right.
And so they used to volunteer and teach there. And I used to go with them. And guess what? Every night I ate dinner with the priest. I used to play darts with them. I used to shoot pool with them. But I never knew what they learned. I used to see them for dinner,
Right.
right? So for years and years I did that. And I never realized that, hey, you know what? They're not just learning how to give a sermon, they're learning how to truly be. And you talked about that cognitive critical thinking that a lot of people don't have
Mhm.
still to today,
Right.
right? So pretty interesting. Thank you for that.
It is interesting. No, and thank you. Well, I would. This is my critical side of me, as I would say. If priests only went to seminary to learn how to give a sermon, well, then the seminary is doing a very poor job, because Catholic preaching is often not very good. Now, this is a shout out to priests out there to improve our preaching, to know how to nourish our people. Because without getting into all the history behind it, but I think there was this reaction. As you know, being Catholic, there's a big focus on the sacraments, on the liturgical aspect, on the mystical aspect, which is
Right.
very important. And I think with the Protestant Reformation or Revolution that started with Martin Luther, there was sort of this divide, and the one side focused on the Word, the other side began to focus more on the sacraments and on the liturgical side.
Mhm.
And so then, a lot of Catholic priests during the centuries realized they put more weight on the sacraments, which is important, but then they less and less training or importance given to the preaching of the word.
Mhm.
And but both are important, so they complement each other. Being nourished with the Eucharist and being nourished with the Word. So, anyways, if going back to your comment, that was the only thing that I think the church has done not a very good job, and then we need to continue to improve that.
Mhm.
But yes, and then after the humanistic studies, then we would study philosophy. And I'd say when I was a chaplain in the Navy, and Catholic chaplains had a lot of respect among all the chaplains, because the other ones were aware of all the education and training that we would go through. And
Mhm.
they would all say that it was far superior to any education and training that they would go through for their training as pastors or as chaplains. So yes, there's philosophy, and I think for good theology, you need to have a very good philosophical base. So we get a bachelor's in philosophy, and then a bachelor's in theology. Then I got my master's in theology and spiritual theology, and then there's some other further postgraduate degrees that I did. But yes, that's the normal, at least for us. And again, it's not about learning, like you said. Sort of people think, oh, they're just learning how to do whatever they do professionally. But it's very much about learning the life in the spirit and about learning
Mhm.
a lifestyle.
Yeah.
There's things that we could talk about around the lifestyle, around the healthy and maybe unhealthy aspects of the lifestyle of the priest. But the fact is, it's an identity, it's a lifestyle, and it really is in its essence and what it's meant to be. It's a life of total service to God and to people.
Mm. You know, and when I think about what you've been telling me, you're telling me that a priest doesn't just go a year, learn how to do a sermon, and then they get put on the pulpit, right? It's a lot more than that. So how long did it take for you to fully become a priest?
Yes, our training was 10 to 12 years. So
Really?
mine was 10 years.
Mm. And
Um,
it's not because you were a slow learner.
Probably, but I would jokingly because again, going back to diocesan and religious orders, they have different sort of learning tracks. It's because it's a different lifestyle. And so a diocesan priest would be normally the minimum would be 7, so it would be 7 to 8 years to become a priest. And in religious life, it could be a little bit longer, depending on the order that you're in. So yes, I would consider our formation very complete as regards the spiritual side, academic, and pastoral
Mm.
training and formation, and all that was included in those 10 years. And now it's actually, I think most people in that order takes 12 years. And it's not because the end goal isn't just to become a priest. The end goal starts at the beginning. I am what they will call a religious. Okay, and religion, and the understanding that what a religious is, what it's supposed to be, a religious person dedicated to religious life, consecrated life. It's supposed to be a living act of religion. In other words, a living act of praise and adoration towards God through the way they live. Now, that's the ideal, right? It's not always that's not always what you come across.
No, not at all.
But that's
So
what being a religious is also. It's a from the very beginning. It's a lifestyle, and it's not just priesthood. In that view, priesthood is seen as one step,
mm,
and it's not seen as the end goal.
yeah, no, incredible. And thank you for shedding light on that. And wow, it definitely, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who may be listening or even watch the replay who are also going to be saying, wow, I didn't know that. So
Mm,
thank you for shedding light on that. And when you talked about I am, serving the I am, because going to church was, for me, it wasn't for children, it's not a choice, right?
right,
Especially when your family's going to church, they're not going to leave you home alone. It's not a choice. And then it becomes a burden. It becomes like, oh, gotta go to church tomorrow. Right? It's gonna be Sunday, and you gotta wear your Sunday best and
right,
all this stuff. And so it became a chore that a lot of kids don't look forward to. And it can become a turnoff. And it wound up being that for me.
right.
And there was so many other aspects of it that slowly turned me away from the church. But I never stopped believing in God. And I think you and I have had this discussion
Hmm.
where actually, once I was old enough, I stopped going to church.
Hmm.
But I kept saying, there's something missing in my life. There's something I need. I'm searching for something. I'm searching. People, people, even behind me, I have books on different religions. I have, things on, meditative stuff. So there's so much out there, but none of it spoke to me.
Hmm.
I'm still looking, right? And then, and I told you this, I picked up the Bible and I said, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to read it. And I made the mistake of reading it from front to back. And I got so mad at it, I threw it away. And then I picked it up again. And I did the same thing. And I got mad and I'm like, whoa, I still need something. And then for some reason, because I'm into podcasting, I was listening to podcasts. I said, wait a minute. I'm sure there's a podcast out there that can help me understand the Bible
Mm,
because I don't understand the Bible. So I picked up, I got something. It said 365 days, every day, listen to this. And they explained it, but I was like, oh, finally. And I bought a Bible. And then what wound up happening, I was talking to a client and they said, well, I grew up Roman Catholic. I got annoyed. I did this, I did that. And I go to this church. And I said, what church is that? And they're like, oh, I said, I pass that church all the time,
mm,
but it was a Christian church. And I said, well, I don't know what the difference is. I've been to services at a Presbyterian church, so I don't know the differences. So I decided to check it out. And I said, I'm gonna go. It's actually was 2022, and I'm going to go January 1st, which was actually it was January 2nd. It was a Sunday.
mhm.
And she goes, I'll go with you. What service do you want to go to? I'm like, well, the earlier the better, because I'm an early bird.
Right.
So she said 8:30. I'm like, oh my, that's my lunchtime. So I said, okay, no problem. I will go then. And she goes, I will go with you. So she goes, where do you want to sit? I said, I always sit in the front. She goes, in the front? I said, yeah, that's the only way. That's anywhere I go, I need to be in the front.
Mhm.
And it's not because I can't hear. It's not because I can't see.
Right.
It's because I want to be in it,
Right.
right? If there's a storm, I want to be with the eye, right? So that's the kind of person I am. And so she goes, okay, I never sit in the front, but I will today. I said, oh, thanks. So we sit in the front. She brought me a Bible. I didn't realize to bring a Bible that day. So she
Right.
brought a Bible, and then she goes, "Would you like pen and paper?" And I'm like, "Actually, I would." Because anytime I hear a speaker, I always have pen and paper to write. And I wrote a bunch of notes, when the pastor was going on. And I said, I think I found the place.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was not what I recall the Roman church, which
Right.
was stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, that kind of thing, kneel, all
Right.
this. So I'm like, why can't I just learn? And then the other thing is, I missed so much of the lessons because they were in Latin.
Right.
I didn't know Latin. So I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. So for me, I was displaced when
Mm-hmm.
I went to Roman Catholic. And I'm not putting any Roman Catholics down or any churches or anything down. It just didn't resonate with me. But when I started going to this one, it did. And he would say, pull out your Bible. I never got that in a Roman church. Maybe they did because they had books then. They said, open up and sing this song. It was
Mm-hmm.
singing songs.
Right.
So it definitely changed. And I go every time, unless I'm traveling, I'm in church. And
Mm-hmm.
even if I'm traveling, they have one that I can do online. So I'll go online and take a look at it. But one of the things that turned me off, and I didn't know it, and I want to share this with you, is the fact that my brother-in-law, he is a saint. I've never met anyone more saintlier than him, except you, of course, and my sister, right?
Right.
This man has given everything to the church. He became a deacon because he could not stay a priest. He was about to be one, but he fell
Right.
in love.
Yeah, and he married your sister, and then he became a permanent deacon, right?
Well, a couple of years after.
Yeah.
This was in Colombia,
Mm-hmm.
where he was about to be a priest. Then he came to the United States, and several years he started working in a church, and then eventually he became
Uh-huh.
a deacon. But what I didn't realize was so frustrating to me is that this man who always thought of the church first, always did everything, they kind of shunned him.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "You're not good enough to be a priest." And that, I don't know if it hurt him. He's never said anything. But I think that's so wrong
Mm-hmm.
because Moses, he was married, wasn't he?
I can't remember.
I think he was
I'm sure
married.
it was. Yes.
But so where does it in the Bible say that if you, I'm just curious if it does say it, that if you are going to be a very, very religious person, that you cannot be married, you cannot have kids of your own. And that was my biggest turnoff.
Right.
And then while I was still going to church with my sister and brother-in-law, I would sit in the front. He would be there because he was a deacon. I was there when he became a deacon. I was also his ring boy for my sister. For him, I was the ring boy. I was 3 years old
Yeah.
when they got married. And so I was one day at church and they said, "Oh, the priest is no longer here. There's a new priest." And I'm like, "Oh, what happened to the other one?" He ran away. Why did he run away? Because he fell in love with one of the women who was singing in the choir. So, but why run away when he could have fallen in love with her, married her, or just dated her and still be there? So
Uh-huh.
I'm not questioning why they do it. To me, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm
Right.
just that's my statement. I'm sticking with it.
Of course, no, and it's confusing for a lot of people. But I think sometimes it's not explained always explained properly.
Mm,
Now, in the Western Catholic Church, it's really the celibacy it's a disciplinary thing.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, using the word disciplinary, in other words, it's based on theology, but it could be changed at any moment. It was something that was established at a certain point in the history of the church as seen as good practice and the way it would be, and then it just took off from there, right? And then a lot of spirituality was developed around it. But people don't always realize that, so that it's something that could be. But when you become a priest, you're aware of that. Now, I think what's often not talked about is what they would call the charism of celibacy. In other words, celibacy. There's a few things I want to say here. Celibacy is a gift, if you want to say it like that, but it's not for everyone. Right? But I think what's difficult in this is that, in other words, if you want to become a priest, right, you want to serve God and serve people, then you have to make this commitment. And a lot of people, as the different stories that you've told, and my own story is like you make this commitment just because I want to serve God, and so this is sort of like they don't always discern properly that, well, are you really called to celibacy? Because it's a very unique lifestyle, not for everyone. It has its purpose and meaning, and not only in the Catholic Church. If you go around all the religions, there's always this sort of element around people that live the celibate lifestyle, whether it be men or women, right? In any religion, they wouldn't. Some, and a lot of them is they don't necessarily do it for their whole lifetime. It's a period of their life, because there's something supernatural about that. Because we are sexual beings, but through sexual intimacy is not the only way that we express our sexuality, right? And so, but you're right. So it's a disciplinary thing. It's a thing and so people would say, well, why don't you just make it optional, right? And the church could do that. But I think if you look at the development of faith and of the church throughout the centuries, it took a negative turn because of the social influences, where the body and sexuality was for some reason seen as negative.
Correct.
And there's heresies in along the way that would preach that, and so the church was never in favor of that. But it sort of there became this thing, and then with the Puritanism, it also which affected the United States and all. With the Puritans that came to the States. So it's what this vision, it's a distorted vision that the body is bad and that sexuality is bad. And then also then what's said is marriage, therefore, is a lesser lifestyle, is on a lower level. And some, in some texts in scripture also talk about this. So, but again, all texts in scripture also, they need to be understood in a larger context. But when you take them out of context, and St. Paul talks about this. And so, but it's not, I think as we develop as theologically and spiritually, as we begin to see, no, they're different lifestyles and neither one is better than the other. But for many centuries, there was this view that priestly and religious life, consecrated life, was seen as holier and better. And so it was kind of like, well, if you're not good enough, then you got to get married. And that's a totally distorted message. Okay, because everyone was missing the point. Because there's, holy smokes, there's the beauty of marriage. So at least from a Christian perspective, every vocation or every calling, or every path, it's an imitation of Christ in some way. Right, and so going back to your thing about scripture, of course, there's people that were virgins and celibate in scripture, right? And the general view would be that Jesus was too. So the church kind of say that this is an imitation of Christ, who dedicated his life totally to God and people, right? And celibacy is one expression of that. So, but anyways, I think there's a lot of distortions that have developed over the centuries and a lot of misunderstandings. Because it's the human element of the church that gets involved. And then things aren't taught properly. Things aren't communicated properly. So but anyways, without going too much into that, those are some perspectives.
Thank you for clarifying things for me and letting me rant about it.
Right,
because,
of course.
Everybody has a different opinion as to how they see things, right? And I did not want to go away from my beliefs, because what does a priest go to heaven if two people die at the same time, a priest and somebody who's not a priest, but somebody like my brother-in-law,
Right.
Who goes into heaven first?
Uh, yeah, well, that's the infinite and eternal. So we as humans we think in time in terms of time. That's
Yeah.
that's not the way it is. But so there were. But I think if you dedicate your life to ministry and to priesthood and to other, you're held also to higher standards because you commit yourself to a higher standard and higher commitment.
Mhm.
But going back to the cultural element of the church, it is, and it is not only the Catholic. I think as human beings, we love our group and so when someone steps out of that, there's sort of this natural rejection, right? And it happens in a lot of other Christian churches. When someone steps away,
Mhm.
they can feel rejected and even persecuted, right? And there's sort of this. It's as human beings, although we don't like cults and sex
Right.
SECT, we sometimes develop those cultures in our groups, in our
Yeah.
clubs, in our religious groups, and then so it is hard, and it's hard for a young mind to understand that,
Mhm.
and in an older mind as well. But when you see this, that all of a sudden someone leaves and does something good and holy, which is falling in love and getting married, that there's this rejection, or seen as you weren't good enough, or seen that you are less.
Right.
Right, of course, and I've experienced it myself in my own journey
Yeah.
of making the decisions that I've made. And there's an institutional rejection, and there's a sense of a lot of my brother priests would feel that I was a traitor.
Mm.
And they might not say it, but it could come across a lot in behaviors, right, and attitudes and reactions.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so it is. It's the human institutional side of every organization, which is hard. In the military, I mean, people when people wouldn't renew their time of service, they would finish their time and then they would leave. Jokingly or non-jokingly, others would look at them like, "You loser."
Couldn't hack it.
Right, it's something that happens in a lot of organizations and human
Mhm.
organizations.
Right.
And so I think it's something that we can all work on. But yes, you would expect. I think when it's in the context of faith, and I'm going to go on a little rant here for a second. But when it's in the context of faith, it touches deeper fibers, right? And I work in the leadership space, so leadership, when it's healthy and when it's wholesome, it's so life giving. Whether that be in the personal life, whether it be in the family context, whether that be in the professional context, in social context, or political context. When it's not, when it's dysfunctional, when it's toxic, or when it's just not healthy, it is very destructive. But when you bring
Mhm.
that to the family context, the destruction goes deeper. When you bring it to the faith context, the destruction is deeper because it touches the deeper fibers of the human being.
Mhm.
That's why when what we're talking about, the sort of rejection and other things in the faith context, it's more hurtful or it's more confusing
Mm. It's
because
deep.
all right, I thought we stood for the dignity of a person. I thought we stood for charity and love and all these things that the scriptures are about and that our faith is about. And so there ends up being this disconnect and this sort of contradiction.
Mhm.
And there's something beautiful about a child's mind, just because a child's mind has a hard time with contradiction.
Mhm.
As adults, we can find ways to reconcile and let contradiction together. Right? And I remember growing up when I was with the monks. I mentioned the human side, but one that I saw that some monks would really give another one a hard time.
Mm.
Right? They were, in my view, they were very uncharitable. Right? And and I went home and I started crying,
Mm.
and I cried, and my mom, and I started crying to my mother because, for my young mind, it was very hard to understand people that dedicate their life to this, that preach this, but then live like that. It was very It was a big contradiction in my mind. It was very hurtful.
Mm. I think you and I are both in the building of a culture.
Mhm.
Culture. See, so when we can take that word cult, but we can add more substance to it, then it becomes culture, right? And so I love this conversation, and I know I took it probably in a different direction than you were thinking, but because you were a priest for what, 20 years?
Yes. So
Wow,
yeah, I had the 10 years of
incredible.
training and education plus the 20 years of ministry.
Mm, incredible. So, you know, And this is the first conversation I've ever had with a priest that was an honest one. And I'm not saying it's because I never had a conversation with a
Right.
priest. I've just said hi, this, but it was never a sit down type of conversation. So I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for that part, because that was a huge part of your life. That is how you became, how you think, all the studies you did, all that you've seen, every little aspect that you've used your senses to incorporate into your whole being, right? Your senses, your eyes, your mouth, your ears, all these different things have shaped you to be the person you are today. The person that I know, I feel like you and I are like brothers, man. I got to tell you, because I may not, or I might have left the church because of the way I feel, but deep in my heart, one thing that was always said, that always stuck with me, is that God is in us, and He's in us wherever we go.
Mhm.
So if that's the fact, do I have to go to a building to worship, or can I worship Him at home?
Of
And I
course.
do. Every morning, I say my prayer. Every
Mhm.
evening, I say my prayer. Sometimes when I'm just by myself, I'm like, let me pray. And I feel that deep connection, right? And it's never stopped whether when I quit going to church, and for about maybe, wow, I got to say, like 14, 15 years, I didn't go to church unless it was like a family function.
Right.
And I was like, okay, time to sit, time to stand, time to kneel. And, and I was just like, I don't want to go there. But now it's such a pleasure to go, right? And I understand that when we are in prayer with other like-minded people, it kind of brings a deeper, deeper feeling for all of us, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not negating any religion or any church or anything like that, or synagogue or mosque or anything. But what I want to say is that I think that finding the religion for oneself and making it yours, truly, not your parents, not your
Right.
families, but yours, I think, to me, that is the deepest thing I've ever done,
Mm.
and finding it for myself.
Right.
And but
Yes.
searching for so many years, right?
Yes. Thank you, Raphael, for sharing that.
Yes,
And
man.
it's true. And we're all on a journey in life.
Mm,
Life is a journey. It's a journey of discovery of ourselves, a journey of discovery of purpose and meaning, and the transcendent, we call God. Um, there's a few things I could say. If we go back to the way families raise their kids, right? There's this sort of we have to be very careful, right? Because there's two extremes. One is we're gonna the very obligation, duty, discipline driven family, that this is what we believe, this is what we do, and that can naturally create some rejection, as
mm,
was your experience, right? Or the other extreme is, well, we're just gonna let our kids figure it out when they get older. Like, I don't, which I wouldn't agree with it, because
correct.
as we understanding psychological development, well, that kids need routines. They need to grow up with something, right? And
Yeah,
then
structure. Yeah.
yes, the structure and habits. Because I know families that at the beginning they don't bring their kids to any type of religious experience. Then they all of a sudden decide to do it when the kids are a little bit older, and that doesn't work, right? They need to grow up with it, so it becomes part of who they are, and then they'll give them that space then to kind of to figure it out, because there's nothing like that fundamental option. There's nothing like that choice that one can make like you did. Um, but we need to be able to go on our journey. In the biblical story of the prodigal son, I love the story because it's about someone who went on their journey to find
Mhm.
their way back home,
Right.
and they had to go through all these things to get there. And I use that as a parallel oftentimes for my own story, right? And how the prodigal son had to go through pain and all this. But it's our life is a journey, and it's being able to choose. And he went back to the same home, but he saw
Mhm.
the home in a different way,
Oh, absolutely.
and in a different light through his experience. And that's important for everyone has to be allowed to go on that journey.
Mm.
Because in life, life becomes much more powerful, much more meaningful. And now, when we go to the institutional side, um, of how religious expression, right? Whether it be, like as I said, the Catholic is sort of like this more the focus on and on the Eastern rites, Orthodox, all that, very focused on liturgical and mystical aspects, right? In the Protestant, we're much more focused on sort of the Christian Protestant, the music and the word, right? I I think I say I always like the mix of both. I think is really wonderful, but I think a lot of both of them sometimes are reactions towards each other. In others, oh, we don't want to be like that, so we got to go this way. Or we don't want to be like that, so we got to, and that hasn't helped anybody, right? And it's very sad to come across. And that's why among young people nowadays there's a great rejection towards institutionalized religion or organized religion because of the contradiction. All the people that say that they believe in the same person or the same thing, and they don't get along and they speak negatively about each other, right? We have 33,000 types of Christian churches in the States alone, right? So it's that confuses the young mind that says, well, I don't want to be part of this. This is all this bunch of and a bunch of pride and arrogance. So it's then they see a lot of violence and division around the world. You have to understand, there's a lot of cultural and historical reasons because of this, but any of it, when it's done in the name of God, again, it touches deeper fibers, and the confusion is also, the hurt is much deeper.
Matthew, I have to say that you're 1,000% right, but what I believe is hurting everyone is the rules that were put in place, because recently, maybe 2-3 months ago, there's a order of nuns that are closing down, and it's a shame. It's a shame because they do amazing work. And when they interviewed one of the nuns, and I think they're closing down maybe at the end of the year, or they have like a year left or whatnot. And the reason she said is because not everyone wants to go into this vocation, because it's incredible sacrifice. They give everything up in order to serve. And I think that is because of the laws that were put in, or the rules, if you will, by man.
Right.
By man. And I'm sure that the priesthood is hurting as well. I'm sure it's not a vocation that every young teenager is going, woof, I can't wait to be a priest.
Right.
I don't think that's happening. And so what is our world coming to when young people are more interested in AI or, the virtual world, and instead of helping one another? So I think that religion overall, all religion, has to really come to age and say, how can we help one another? How can we do the right thing? How can we be more I am, right? I am is what? God. How can we, if God is in us, how can we be more like that? And let's remove some of the rules and let people truly serve, so that we can move forward in a more positive way than what's really happening in our world today.
Yes. But yeah, I think it's organized religion gets very stuck in the way things, at least the way they think things need to be. I'm a big believer in tradition and all this, but also we have to pay attention to the world around us and the ability to adapt to the needs of our people and to cultural trends. That's something that the Catholic Church always tried to do, but because being such a large and old organization, it was always very slow to adapt.
Yes.
Right? And it lost a lot of people in the process. And then it wasn't very good at, I continue to live the Catholic faith, but I'm also a constructive critic, right, of a lot of the institutional side, because I think there's so many things that could be done better. But it's very slow in reacting, and then and then it's very poor in communicating really what's important. But like you said, I think religious life or nuns or whatever, they're there for a season, right? An organization, normally one of those groups starts to fill a need in society, right? There was a need in healthcare. And so someone gets together and they get people to this is what we're going to do. We're all going to dedicate our life to God and to the healthcare of others. Education, serving the poor, right? Normally, every group is born because of a need in society. But there also comes a moment when there's no longer that need, or that identity is no longer. But that's hard for a group. It's hard for any group to sort of realize that they're no longer needed. Right? That's the fear, and that's what I wouldn't say. What the nun said is. I think people are still attracted towards service, but the expressions are now there's different expressions now, and it won't always be the expression of being a nun or being a monk or being a priest or being. That had its season, right? But that's hard again for any religious organization to sort of die out. Is always seen as a negative and as a loss. I don't think so. I think it's just there's a time. It was born for a reason, and then when that reason ceases to exist, or we are no longer adapting to the expressions or to the needs, then we cease to exist. But it's always hard. It's always hard because you've given so many people have given their life to that.
It was heartbreaking when I heard that, and I was driving. I listen. I don't listen to the news.
Right.
I only listen for 5 minutes while I'm driving, and that was one of the topics that came up in the news conversation. And it was like, I felt bad, right? But what I want to do now is flip everything around and get more. And my gosh, what a great conversation we've had so far. But I want to get into something that you touched earlier. You were in the Navy. What? Tell us about that. What, you're a priest. How'd you get into the Navy? Tell us about that. Did you go through Navy boot camp as well?
I went through officer development school. So yes, part of going to Navy, my personal story is really, I was already questioning if ministry was the place for me. And the military chaplaincy had been on my mind for a number of years. And so I saw it as this is something that I want to do. And if I don't do it now, I'll never be able to do it if I end up stepping out of ministry. This is also, it was part of my own, what I would call my discernment process. It was part of my journey to gain greater clarity of what was the right fit for me. So yes, in doing that, you have to jump through a lot of, because you're hired by the federal government, hired by the Department of Defense. There's this whole hiring process. I went to the Pentagon to be interviewed by a board, of like 10 people. And so it's very sophisticated and intricate and selection process. So and then you're hired as not only as a chaplain but as an officer. So we have to go to officer development school to learn how to be officers. Now we're not line officers. In other words, we're not people that lead people into combat or whatever. We're staff officers. So we're sort of like the backdrop where we support the mission by supporting our people. We like the nurses, the doctors, the dentists, the lawyers, the chaplains, people like that. We're staff officers. So really, we're not trained for the science of combat or war or anything like that. That's not what we're there for. But we're there really to support the mission, more importantly, support the people.
Gotcha.
So in officer development school, we learn a lot about just the policies and practice and how to carry ourselves as naval officers. But it's intense, not as intense as a boot camp or anything like that, but it's definitely pushed me to some of my limits, psychologically, mentally, and somewhat physically. And it's meant to do that. And then we do 2 months of chaplain school, which is learn how to minister in that very unique culture and manner in the armed forces. So because it's very diverse, I was at a command of about 5,000 people, and chaplain does a few things, but chaplain is there for everyone. A chaplain cares for everyone at the command. I was the only chaplain, for all of it. There's a lot of rotation, but you are the point of reference for certain things, especially for the management of the human element. And chaplain exists to protect and facilitate the members of the armed forces their constitutional right to religious freedom. Then you're there to provide religious services according to your own faith background. So in my case, I would provide Catholic services. But part of my job is to make sure that everyone has access to their faith practice. Third, you care for everyone at the command, right? Really, you care for them as people, and from whatever their faith background is. But a lot of what you care for is just that human aspect. People, I wouldn't say, a fraction of all the conversations would have to do with God or faith. It was really just who they are as people and how to help them continue to be successful and with whatever stressors or difficulties or challenges that we're going through. And then the fourth thing that a chaplain does is we are advisors to all the commanding officers. Right, so I served about 8 commanding officers at different ranks, and then all of their senior enlisted advisors. And so, which is fascinating. I love the job at chaplain because you have access to everyone, from from the private all the way up to the colonel and general, right? And you have free access. So you just kind of flow throughout the command and really access to everyone, taking care of everyone. And that function of as advisors, you're advising commanding officers around how to deal with certain situations, certain issues, command climate, how they're dealing with the human element, because they're not necessarily trained in that, they're trained in other things. And so all the people I worked with very much valued my perspective, and that I would speak very freely and I would offer my insight, and they would take it for what it was worth. So yes, that's what a chaplain does.
Wow, incredible! I know you have to go very shortly, and I understand that, and I think that maybe what we should do is part two
All right.
when we have a chance, because I want to get into, and it only goes to show me that it makes sense that you do what you do today as a leadership, right? Somebody who helps high level people understand where they're going, how they're going. And I'm sure that a lot of people, just once they find out that you're a priest, they probably come with their confessions to you too, right? Which is like, wait a minute, that's not my capacity anymore. But I definitely want to go deep down that energy that you bring to the people that you're serving now. And as a leader yourself, you not only have done all the studies, but you've been all over the world, especially, and you talked about how much you love Colombia as one of your favorite parts of South America, and thank you for that. But I think, and I know I don't want to rush it right now, so if I would love for you to come back and for us to go, because I think this was the religious aspect of
That's
everything that
right.
we talked about, and I want to get into what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how you're helping people, because we have your information across the screen, bracketalliance.com, bracket with 2 T's,
That's right.
and definitely follow Matthew. Let him know how he will let you know how he can help you, but he helps so many leaders, and he is so inspirational. Everybody, do me a favor, follow Matthew. He is truly genuine. He is an inspiration. You have been an inspiration to me, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael. So yeah, people can find me there at my website, LinkedIn at Matthew Brackett, Instagram, Matthew Brackett Official. Those are different places. And just to clarify, even though my background is one of faith and formal ministry, I don't bring that to my professional services unless someone wants that.
Right.
It's added value if people want it, because that's an area of expertise. But that's not what I. In other words, I'm very respectful of where I meet people where they're at, and I follow their agenda of where they want to go, and I help them get there.
That's it.
So thank you, Raphael.
You're their guiding light, right?
Well, we try. We all do our little bit. Many people have been that for me, so we all lean on each other. But thank you for having me on the show. And yes, we touched the surface in one aspect of my life. So much more. But thank you very much.
Let's do another one.
All right. Thank you, Raphael.
All right, my friend. Have an amazing and beautiful rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.